Hello, this video is sponsored by BritBox, the premier streaming service for Britain's most beloved TV shows. In a minute, I'll be talking to 7-time Emmy Award winner Jim Williams about British versus American television on Jim's podcast Stream On. What you're about to watch is the made-for-YouTube version of the chat, but I've linked to the full conversation below. In the meantime, my own producers have told me that throughout the chat I should try to loosen up and project an air of confidence and give the impression that I know what I'm talking about. So throughout I'll be maintaining eye contact and talking like this. And before I dive into this interview, what do you all think of the Doctor Who shirt? What do you mean it's unprofessional? It's the only one I have clean. Well, this one, no, I can't wear this one. I wore this one in a previous video, it hasn't been washed. Without further ado, let me hand you over to Jim Williams.
Good afternoon, morning, or wherever you are. I'm Jim Williams from Stream On with Jim Williams and my partner in crime, my new best friend, Lawrence Brown. It's good to have you. Let's talk a little bit. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Jim. Partners in crime and crime television today.
That's right. Yeah. There's so many different wonderful mysteries on BritBox. One of the things that I see, and then I'm obviously want your opinion on it, the British, specifically BBC ITV, in their productions, they do mystery better, in my mind, than the US.
Yeah, I'd be very interested to get your reasoning for saying that, firstly. And because I tend to agree, but I think when Americans say it, it does make me wonder, is there another element to this when Americans have this fascination with British mysteries? The setting for those shows in a kind of quaint British village in the Cotswolds almost elevates the story in a way that can't really be replicated in America. But the reason that maybe it is that we have such a history of kind of mystery stories right back to Sherlock Holmes and the like. And I think it's just a tradition that's sort of, remained, I think, throughout British program making and storytelling in general. And maybe because we are a country with a very, an old bloody history, one that possibly has, among its stories, several ghost stories from thousands of years ago. And culturally, I think that gets ingrained in us as a people. Like, I used to live in the town of Lancaster, and they did a lot of the witch trials there. Don't know what it is. I'm not really a superstitious person, but I got a real sense of ghostliness. Now, I know that what we're talking about here is more to do with mysteries, solving actual crimes and things like that. But it still speaks to that sense of, mystery, or this kind of something you couldn't quite imagine anywhere else. And I think that something like a Poirot, or something like any Agatha Christie, story, or the ones we're talking about today, really do lend themselves to that environment growing up in it.
I think for me, what it is that they're normally well written and they don't last as long. When you go from 4 to 6, 8, maybe even 10's pushing it, episodes of a series. Jim and Curio, I've interviewed him 3 or 4 times, and his concept is, when the story is finished, I drag it out. The less is more category means that you get the best bits, as opposed to 22 episodes of Law and Order, of which 4 of them you can't even remember what happened. In the Line of Duty, which we'll get to in a minute or two, the beauty of that is each episode leaves you wanting to get to the next one, because there's always something that's got the hook to it that you're like, all right, I had it. Nope, I didn't have it. Now I have it. Nope, he screwed me up again.
That's right. I think the less is more mentality has served British television very well. It's not just obviously in dramas. I mean, you see this in comedy as well. If you think of Fawlty Towers, you think of The Office. It's often said that, they benefited from quality over quantity. And the other thing about that as well is the kind of frequency with which they air these shows. Sometimes, I think Line of Duty might be an example of this. You could be waiting 2 years for a new series to come out. And because of that just gives you more time, I think, to flesh out a rich story, one that is very tight, and as you say, keeps you wanting to watch the next episode. Whereas if you look at something like, CSI in this country, obviously multiple episodes. I think we're talking in the region of about 22 episodes a season. And we're talking on an annual basis too. So the frequency of the output is so much greater, because I think that demand from network television is probably greater.
The only show that I can think of that has that same kind of cachet here in the States is The Detectives, which was an HBO show, which started with Matthew McConaughey, and they just kind of rolled through different detectives. But this one is beautiful in the fact that it's well written, but the core group of AC-12, they keep everything on point, and then everything spins off of that.
As is pretty normal with these sorts of shows. You're right. You
Mhm.
have those kind of multiple narratives happening that also all
Mhm.
interweave and things like that.
The thing with Line of Duty that I enjoy, you wanna binge it. I mean, that's part of
Yeah,
it, it's like, I wanna get to the next one. It's one of those things where you sit there and go, "Okay, I'm not gonna do that because, first of all, I will not get to bed till 4 o'clock in the morning." I kinda want to, take that anticipation. I mean, we now are in a place where prime time is whatever time you want it to be. This one, you just wanna say, "Okay, I wanna watch it, and I wanna be able to enjoy it, and I don't want to go, miss something in it."
right.
Because that's the other part to Line of Duty. There's always a little quirk here or there that you may miss the first time around, but it comes back to be important the second time you see it.
That's right. You really do have to listen. And I think it's worth mentioning with Line of Duty specifically, but just some of these other ones.
Mm.
We made that comparison between the length of a season compared to
Mhm.
the United
Mm.
States. But there is something to keep in mind, and that's that something like Line of Duty, each episode has a runtime of close to, is it an hour, something like that?
Yes, in
And
that ballpark, yeah.
exactly, and without
Mhm.
advertisements in between there as well. Whereas
Mhm.
in most American network television, you're going to
Mhm.
expect to break that show up with ads. So it could be that
Right.
even binging 8 to 10 episodes of British television
Mhm.
can sometimes,
Right.
be quite a lengthy process. So
Right, yeah.
I see exactly
Yeah.
what you're saying with that.
You could miss work on Monday and Tuesday if you kept going.
If you are the sort of person to binge watch British shows, the best place to do so is BritBox. BritBox is the streaming home of the biggest and best selection of great British television, including an absolute feast of gritty crime dramas like Line of Duty, The Responder, and Vera, as well as mysteries like Father Brown, Sister Boniface, and the Agatha Christie stories. Not only that, it's got all of your favourite programmes from the world of comedy, drama, and documentaries. Since I now spend most of my days watching Morning Doves, one of my personal favourites is Country File. Not that we have Morning Doves in the UK, but you get the picture. And you can start streaming titles like these today via your smartphone, tablet, desktop, Chromecast, Apple TV or Roku device, as well as LG and Samsung smart TVs. Head to BritBox.com/LostInThePond and use the promo code LostInThePond when signing up for a monthly subscription, and you'll get 50% off your first month. The link is also in my description below.
You and I talked about costs of these things
Yeah.
and the cost of doing a British television show versus the cost of doing, say, Law and Order SVU. Okay.
Yeah.
If you're doing a 22-week show and, an 8 or a 10 series show, editors who are involved in sweetening the show whenever it's done. Budgets, you can't really compare budgets. That wouldn't be fair because you're comparing it 8 shows versus 22 shows.
Mhm.
But the quality of entertainment value, certainly in Line of Duty and many others, is there. It's
Yeah.
always there. Part of the thing, and this is something I wanted to ask you. Here in the United States, television is quote unquote free. There's linear broadcast, which is ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, PBS.
Mhm.
Those are free over the air broadcast channels. But in the UK, you have to pay a TV tax. How does that work?
Yeah, TV license. I forget the
Mhm,
actual cost of it, but it was
mhm.
something over £100. You had a television in your house that was
Right.
capable of showing BBC. You are, by law, you have to pay a TV license in order to do that. And then the funds from that TV license help to fund programming on the
Right.
BBC. Because of that, they're not so beholden, the BBC, to
Right.
ratings. Right? It's all in the
Mhm.
public interest. That's why you get this thing where it's not about casting the most aesthetically pleasing people to stick on a poster in order to sell your
Mhm.
show. It's about making realistic stories
Right.
that are within the public interest because the public is paying for them. I think that's a big difference from the United States in general, unless you're
Right.
talking about public television. But of course, that doesn't have the broad reach in the US that it does in the UK.
Right. And the PBS here gets some government money, but they
Yeah.
also rely on people to fund it via
Yeah.
subscription. One of the other things that you see in UK productions is that they'll whack a main character. That would never happen in a, you're just sitting there going, wait, what?
Yeah. In the US, that person is a box office asset. In the
Right.
UK, their death could be an asset to the storytelling. I mean, that's what it
Right.
all comes back to. Weirdly, though, it often happens because British actors have said yes to a Hollywood film and they can no longer do this TV show in Britain. So
Right.
they go off, and that's how it is. Deaths in television, massive thing in soap operas, which are a massive thing in England. So that idea tends to be more accepted, I think, just in television in general in Britain.
Our next show, and this one is a spin-off from Father Brown. Dr. Brown.
No relation.
No. Father Brown. The funny thing is on this is Sister Boniface was in episode 3 or 4 of the first season of Father Brown.
This one's quite a sort of almost a joyful experience watching it, even though what we're talking about is people being murdered, and those cases have to be solved. It almost calls to mind something like A Murder, She Wrote, right down to the notion that these murders all happen around, Sister Boniface.
And Murder, She Wrote was a show here in the United States, was one of the top rated shows. It came on Sunday night, every Sunday night at 8 o'clock after 60 Minutes on CBS. And Angela Lansbury, who was a supposed teacher who decided to be then turned mystery writer, and after she retired, became a super sleuth. Your comparison, I think, to Sister Boniface is very fair on that.
Interestingly, with that show, especially for somebody like me who's lived in Britain and America, of course, Angela Lansbury was born in England but became a US citizen early in her life. So that was already of interest. But it's interesting that the United States there made a television series that was, it was almost British in nature. We're not afraid to throw in a bit of comedy, even though we're talking about murder. And so it's almost surprising that wasn't a British show. It's a very interesting thing with those kind of shows, where you've got a central character that's just more or less situated in the same locale every episode.
Right.
And they happen to have murders happening around them all the time. If that happened to me, I'd seek out therapy, I think.
I would move from Cabot Cove.
I think so, yeah. That's the thing about it. You go into it thinking, oh, this couldn't possibly work as a series. It sounds so implausible. And then you sit down and you're hooked because they almost find a level of credibility. Like when you watch Father Brown, I went into that thinking it was going to be an out-and-out kind of comedy, actually, because I just thought, a priest at the center of these investigations, or rather on the periphery of them, but doing his own work. It just sounds too comical. But then there's a lot of kind of reasoning as to why he should be the key person there, and is the key person there
for sure,
for solving some of these crimes. And you really start to believe it as it's going.
I've noticed in British television, there's not a lot of spin-offs, but in this particular case, it made a lot of sense to do it that way.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, spin-offs is a good point. I think you occasionally see it, but I think maybe more so in the United States. I think of Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul. Maybe, I don't know, maybe there's a financial justification that's more easy to find here.
To your point about spin-offs here, if you've got like Law and Order SVU, they're franchises. NCIS, which is NCS, Los Angeles used to be NCIS, New Orleans, that's gone. To be honest, what it is you've got producers who have deals with the networks, and the networks don't want to lose a producer, so producer continues to build shows around it, and you build a franchise.
I like that you brought up the word franchise there, because when I think of the word franchise, I always think of the United States, even though, of course, the concept is very much in existence in Britain, because it just seems like so many things get franchised. If you look at soccer in the MLS, you talk about franchises there rather than football clubs.
When I think of a show like Midsummer Murders, to me, that's a franchise. To get the multiple seasons that they have out of, and you call it series. I keep getting the I
was going to say
the terminology down a little bit.
There is some terminology differences, for sure. Yeah.
Because you were right about the fact that a Doc Martin, which might have 9 series, might have taken 14 years to get to those 9 series. I don't know how well that would play here. From a standpoint of if I'm watching a show and then it takes a year off and comes back, maybe my short attention span is not going to handle that. But one thing we have seen is in the streaming world is we see that.
It was quite jarring to me, actually, having lived in the US now for 14 years, that I had to wait 2 or 3 years for the next season of Stranger Things on Netflix. It didn't feel American to me. It's like, you're supposed to get that the next year. Where is it?
The interesting part is Hugh Laurie really desperately was a fan of Agatha Christie. So he optioned that particular piece, wrote it and directed it, and he's in it. It's not a comedy, but it's pretty darn close.
Yeah, it's quite playful, I think, but obviously the drama at hand is what guides the show,
Mhm.
and the cast is amazing. I mean, you've
Yeah.
got Emma Thompson, you've got Jim
Yeah.
Broadbent. It's pretty star-studded. And the one thing that I think is interesting about this, it's a short series, right? It's
Right.
shorter even than most
Normal,
British.
yeah.
You know, how common is that kind of thing in the US? When I was looking up limited series earlier on, actually it brought up True Detective. That show has 8 episodes per show, which to us that's a full season. But
Right.
to America, that could be considered a limited series. Do
Yep.
you ever get kind of 3-parters that happen here in the US?
Usually it's more along the lines of 3 or 4. I mean, 4
Yeah.
probably. You know, the miniseries used to be very big in the
Yeah.
70s and 80s on network television. That way, you could take what, in essence, frankly, should have been shot as a movie and probably was shot that way. And then you can dice them up into 4 segments and that way cover the cost. You know, there were some famous, Roots being one of them, which was a famous miniseries. There are a number of miniseries. It's not as much nowadays as in the old days, but I am finding that, for instance, the streaming services, whether it's Netflix or Hulu or any of the others, are doing that.
It's funny that you say that they shoot it as a movie, because that seemed to be
Mm.
how these limited series, if you want to call it that, are
Sure.
perceived in the US, that often they are straight to TV movies. I remember when, I think it was that the 1990 version of Stephen King's It came
Yeah.
out as a 2-parter, and that was big in Britain. And, you know, I remember that. But we referred to it, I think it was a 2-part serial. But it seems that it's something that we are still very much willing to do in Britain. I mean, I think of Sherlock is usually, what, 3 episodes, something like
Right.
that, but with lengthier running times.
They were shot with a single camera, and when we shoot single camera, normally that has a movie feel to it, even if it's not a movie. I think with this particular show, it's quirky, but quirky sometimes works. And I think in the case of this one, quirky definitely works.
Yeah, I think it does. It just adds the right amount of lightness in those moments when it's needed, and does a good job as well of building up the suspense. Of course, a lot of that is down to the fact that the source material is Agatha Christie. It's also a very beautiful show in terms of its location. Maybe it's somewhere in Wales. I could be making that up. It's just absolutely gorgeous seeing the countryside, and they often pan over it, of course. That speaks again to what I was asking earlier on about, does that elevate a British show when an American watching it sees that wonderful British countryside and hears those British accents in tandem with it? Does it take it to a new level? Because I grew up with this is where I live. I didn't really have that necessarily. Whereas if I was watching American TV shows and they're out in the Grand Canyon or somewhere in Utah, I'm taken by that. That to me is sort of epic and amazing. So I'd be interested to know, you know, how Americans feel when they see that kind of location.
You know, it becomes a character.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a living, breathing character. And, you know, there's so many shows on BritBox where you see that. English countryside is a place where you're sitting and going, I really want to go there. I want to see what this is like.
It almost doesn't matter what the subject matter is. I mean, you'd happily go to the place where Why Didn't They Ask Evans is set, but not to find a dead body, right?
No.
It's all about the sort of,
Yeah.
and it's similar to me, right? When I was growing up, I really loved the film Jaws and wanted to visit Cape Cod and all of that, but not to try
not
to
to
see
see the shark. Yeah, that one.
Exactly.
For some reason, British actors and actresses can do American accents a whole lot better than the Yanks can do a British accent.
I have a theory about that. I think it's because we are so exposed to American television and film in the UK, whereas I think in the US, if you are exposed to British accent, it's usually the Queen's English or perhaps how they speak in London. Although there have been examples, I think, of American actors actually nailing the British accent. But you're right, it does seem to happen more frequently the other way around.
The other way around, yeah.
Oh, thanks for listening to the chat. Let me know in the comments below, you know, some of your observations of British versus American television. And I've linked to the full conversation below, so you can go and listen to that and all of Jim's socials as well. Until the next video, have a good one.